Rebecca, what's going on? Welcome to the Dad Edge podcast.
Thanks. It's nice to be here.
It's nice to have you here. The art of talking with children, simple keys to nurturing kindness, creativity, and confidence. I think you're hitting upon the most important things that have our attention as fathers. And one of them being obviously connection and how to even have conversations with our kids. So before we get started, let's just give the guys some context on your family, what your family looks like right now.
Sure. Yeah. So I have two kids. Their ages 5 and 10, and we live in Boston. My husband is French, so we're actually raising them bilingually in English and French, which has been fun. We've lived in Boston since they've been born.
Very cool. And you guys have been married since 2008.
Yeah, it's been a long time.
Well, let's start out with some fun questions first. How about that?
Sounds good.
All right. So what's something that brings you joy outside of work and just even outside of family, even if it's just something just for you? What's something that you like to do?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say I'm really active. And actually, during the pandemic, I started getting into open water swimming. So swimming out in lakes and ponds and wherever, you can find a good swimming hole around Boston. It's really fun. I got into kind of swimming even with a wetsuit as it got colder. And it really feels very meditative and just kind of time that I'm out in nature and, without anyone calling me or anything like that. So that's been a joy in my life.
Well, that's the first thing that came to my mind was the temperature. And we're coming off, it's May when we're launching the podcast, but we're just now coming off of, some pretty severe weather, especially up in the Northeast. So how have you handled that one?
Yeah, I definitely, my husband and my family actually laugh because we would go to Walden Pond where I like to swim. And right now it's, there's a layer of ice still on it. They're like, do you want to just, pound a hole in the ice and take a little dip, which I'm not to that level, I would say. But I do, yeah, I'll start out probably in May, go till October or so, I think now. And there are people out there who go, most of the year until ice is over, which is to me pretty incredible. But I do like it. I think it's very peaceful and something I've found a lot of passion for.
Well, there's a word that we identify those people that like to swim in ice, and they're called crazy.
Exactly. I'm like, I don't think I'm not going that far.
The rest of us are sane. So
exactly.
We've got that. Let's have, how about a fun question with marriage? What's something that you and your husband like to do without kids?
Yeah, I would say we really like to go to movies. So we're always watching films, talking about, art films, any kind of films, just constantly going out to movies. And we actually, before kids, we're trying to get back to it, but we used to travel a lot. So we would go to a new country that we'd never been to every year for New Year's. So it's cool. We went to all over the place, like Vietnam, Cambodia, Japan, Argentina. We just picked like a really random place as far away as possible and go there. And I actually I was sort of the travel planner because I like planning. So I would find sort of the, very strange places to stay. Like I found once a hotel that was like $10 on the ocean in Vietnam. And I was like, I don't know if this is bad or it could be good. So I would always book these crazy things. And I think we're going to hopefully get back more to that as the kids get a bit older. But
that is so cool. Has there been any favorite travels that you and your husband have gone on?
Yeah, I would say actually, Cambodia, I would say is probably one of my best destinations. I just felt the language is beautiful. There's just so much history there, so much to see. And and the culture is so rich. So I was really fascinated by that, especially.
And any place that you want to go visit that you haven't yet?
Yeah, I'm really hoping, it sounds, it's a little cliche, but I'm really hoping to go to Hawaii. I've never been surfing actually. Since I love the ocean, I love water. And to me, the idea of surfing in Hawaii is sort of on my bucket list of things I must do hopefully soon. So it's not impossible, but I just need to make it happen.
That sounds amazing. My wife and I were talking actually this past weekend about bucket list destinations that we've always wanted to go to. Hawaii is definitely one of them. Neither one of us have been there. We'd love to go there. Another question for you, just fun little warm up question. which is so you were married in 2008. So you've been married for 14 years, been a mom for 10, right? So let's go back to 2007, okay, and just very vividly, right? So I want you to think about the person that you are today, and I want you to invite Rebecca from 2007 out to dinner for 1 hour, and you have the opportunity to talk to your 2007-year-old self, and you have the opportunity to give yourself some advice on what the next 14, 15 years have in store for you. What would you be telling yourself about marriage and kids?
That is a really great question.
I ask really great questions, so
Yeah.
I'm not good at a lot. I can't fix things with my hands very well, but I can ask good questions.
That's nice. I appreciate it. Yeah. So I guess I would say probably that you will be tested and challenged in ways that you can't imagine, but also find joy and inspiration in ways you couldn't imagine. So just that there will be much more richness and complexity to your life than you might have thought possible.
That's cool. That's cool. Is there anything you would warn yourself about?
Warn myself. I think I would probably. So when I'll just tell a little story. Is when I was 25 actually. Yeah. And so, or a little bit younger than that. Right after my first grad school, I moved to Greece to teach sort of high school English for a year. And my boyfriend at the time, we were long distance for the year. So I was sort of debating, should I go to Greece? Should I, really do this? And is that going to be a challenge for our relationship? And I guess I would definitely tell myself, like, go everywhere, do all the things, travel as much as possible, because it does become a lot more complicated once you have lots of things and obligations to deal with. So I would say it's definitely take advantage of all the opportunities that you have.
I would agree. So we have 4 boys.
Oh, wow.
My wife and I, everybody says, oh, wow. I can almost say it before they do, 16, 14, 8, and 6. And one thing I can tell you, like I had a younger person who's a client of mine ask me the same question because his kids are little. It's like, is there anything you wish you would have done before kids that you didn't do? I was like, oh yeah. I was like, I would have traveled more. I was like, early on in my wife and I's relationship, we didn't have a whole lot of money to travel or money to do much of anything. But that's one thing that I think looking back on it, I would have just gladly at this point put it on the credit card and just went and experienced some travel. So I love that. You mentioned, I want to get right to your book, which is, like I said, The Art of Talking with Children, the Simple Keys to Nurturing Kindness, Creativity, and Confidence in Kids. You actually mentioned the word rich in the answer that the question I just asked you, and you mentioned that word rich, but in your book, you talk about rich talk and what it is and how it's important to help kids thrive, especially when they're anxious or they're uncertain and that kind of thing. But what exactly is rich talk?
Yeah, so it's something I developed really as a way to make a framework around what actually is the best way to jumpstart deep conversations. So it's really, I put together 3 ABCs of rich talk. The first A is just adaptive, meaning that you're really moving with what your child wants or needs at any moment. So say your child's in sort of a bad or shut down mood, you kind of adapt in that moment. So you're not trying to maybe pry, but just, stand back a bit. And then you're also adapting over time. So say your child is like preteen or tween and they stop having these really deep one-on-one conversations with you. But maybe they'll start having them when they are in the car with you or they are working out with you or something like that. So you're adapting over the long term too, not feeling like, oh, it always has to be this one way, but you can actually shift and move with them. And the B is back and forth. So I feel like we often talk at our kids. We're coming with lectures. We have like a point to make, and we have something prepared.
No,
yeah, and our kids are like, wait, well, I don't, you don't understand. You're not listening to me, and sometimes we are listening, but sometimes we really do just want to get this point made, which is fine. That has to happen sometimes. But I'm really emphasizing a back and forth where there's, you're really listening to what your child's saying and responding to that. Doesn't mean you give them what they want necessarily, but you are responding to what they really are trying to tell you. And you're teaching them to do the same thing. So kind of like that active listening on both sides. And C is child driven. So meaning that you're trying to start with what is on your child's mind. So that might mean positively, like they're really excited to tell you something, or negatively, like they're really worried about something or scared about something. But whatever it is, I think starting with what's on your child's mind is really a recipe for richer or deeper conversations because they're already naturally engaged with you. So those are the kind of the three main ABCs I put together.
Very cool. And how do parents, what is one of the best strategies to shut down that talking at our kids? Or maybe we think that every single interaction and conversation, it needs to have a purpose and it needs to have maybe lessons, or it needs to have a disciplinary action, or it needs to have this or that. What are your thoughts on that, on the balance of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it can feel really hard, especially because, I take like the end of the day, oftentimes after school, we really want to know, like, how was your school day? How was math? How did you do in this? And, there's often this sort of checklist that we have in our heads. And I think one way to get past that is to really recognize that these moments, like you can have small moments that accumulate. So deep conversations or rich conversations can be about anything. Like I've talked to parents who are like, what should we talk about? What are we supposed to talk about? And I'm, respond with, you can talk about literally anything. Like you can have a deep conversation about a rock you find on the side of the road, or about like a sign that you were passing, about like anything like that. So it doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be sort of like a big topic, a big conversation. And actually the lessons or the points that you want to make actually come across much more clearly in that back and forth, that more relaxed way of talking, rather than, if you're actually just saying it straightforward. And that often comes across as nagging, or, kids are just not really processing that. So even though we're saying it, kids aren't really making sense of it all the time.
Got it. What about the ages? So like, are our kids in conversations, like what ages are they kind of broken up into? So like selfishly, I'm asking this question right for myself, but I'm also asking for the audience as well. So my 14 and 16-year-old, those conversations are quite a bit different than my 8 and 6-year-old, right?
Definitely.
And, so maybe give us some age appropriate ranges and maybe what conversations should look like within those age appropriate ranges.
Yeah, so definitely. So one thing I think I wanted to emphasize in the book is that the principles, like the overall ABC principles, can go throughout the whole ages. So whatever age you're working with, still being adaptive to the child, being back and forth, all of that can really help you have those conversations. But definitely, obviously, the conversation will be different if you have an 8-year-old or a 6-year-old versus a 14-year-old. So a couple of things I think about are, first, how concrete are you? So how much are you actually focusing on what's here right in front of you, something you can see? And kind of the younger the child, the more concrete I think you should start. So for example, if you have a 4-year-old and they, are asking questions about, I don't know, like death because someone had just died or something like that. So actually like taking them somewhere, helping them see, like, here's a gravestone, here's the actual plot, it's kind of a morbid example, but actually, being able to see something in front of them and starting from that point is much more effective than talking in the abstract. And as kids get older, you can do more of that abstract thinking, but they're just not able as much to do that when they're younger. And another thing I would say is just how much they can manage their own emotions. So that also really changes, obviously. So when they're younger, if they're having a tantrum or if they're like just not even sure what they're feeling, it can be really helpful to focus more on helping them identify their emotions. Like, are you feeling more sad? Are you more anxious? Or, let's look at your face. Let's look at how your body language is, that kind of thing. Whereas when they're older, they can oftentimes do more of that, labeling themselves. They just need more openings. So I'd say that those are the two main things that really change. But obviously, obviously it's very different depending on the age, for sure.
It's interesting that you talk about, there's a couple of big points that I want to expand upon. Number one is like trying to talk in abstracts to like my 8-year-old and 6-year-old, right? So if I were to talk about somebody who just died, especially like my 6-year-old, he'd be like, what, where? right? You know, like as soon as like he'd be like, well, what are we talking about? And
Yeah,
you can't really
exactly.
articulate the thought, right? But my 16 and 14-year-old, they would definitely get that without a shadow of a doubt. The other thing that you really hit upon too is emotional labeling. So on this podcast and in our community, we are really big on that. Not only with kids, but even with our wives, like being able to identify, you know, labeling what she might be feeling, right? And how powerful that is. I think it's safe to say that a lot of kids, and I would say a lot of young men, a lot of men who are grown men today, we were raised in an environment where we were talked to like, so for instance, the way I was talked to as a kid, stop crying, only babies cry, toughen up, man up, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which doesn't give me a whole lot of emotional intelligence. In fact, if anything, when I start to feel those feelings, I identify those as, well, that's just me being weak. And I shouldn't feel that way. And I should just shove it down, put my head down and go.
Right.
But what are some of the detrimental effects of that? And what are some of the advantages of helping our kids label their emotions?
Yeah, definitely. So I definitely know. I think that's still really prevalent today, even though it's maybe less so. But yeah, that sense of stop crying. And I think the risk there is that kids are feeling those big emotions, but now you're just laying on a layer of shame. So it's like they feel that negative, you know, sad or angry or upset, but now they're also feeling angry at themselves for feeling those emotions. Which then can create a really negative spiral where they're sort of feeling like, well, if I feel those things, it must mean something bad about me. So I shouldn't feel those things. And what we know, I think, from the research is that you can't stop feelings. You know, you can suppress them, but they come out in other ways. You know, so they come out in, you know, behaviors and like things like alcoholism later on, or, you know, and depression, anxiety, hyperactivity. So they can come out in lots of ways and where we as adults are struggling to handle emotions we feel like we shouldn't feel. But actually being able to process them, you know, through talking, through writing, all of that really does help us feel more connected as people, but then also to not need to do some of those things. So I think it is so important to be able to feel that all emotions are welcome and all, you know, expressions of emotion, you know, are welcome. And which just maybe we need to help regulate ourselves in terms of what we want to show other people. But it's not that we need to stop crying or stop feeling emotions, which is really impossible.
I love how you said that they come out in other ways, because they will, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, like we have a lot of grown men who die of heart attacks, right? Because they suppress their emotions so much over the years. What do we do after we label a kid's emotions? So let's just say, you know, we have, you know, an 8-year-old. He's upset. The story may or may not be true. The story may or may not be more than 24 hours old. Just throwing that out there. Okay.
Here's an example.
Well, let's just say you have an 8-year-old that was playing basketball with his 14-year-old brother, right? And his 14-year-old brother was playing very nice with him and, you know, was allowing him to score and all that other stuff. But at the end of the game, he lost the game and he was very upset over it, like extremely upset. And really, to add insult to injury, he viewed his 14-year-old brother as rubbing it in that he won, even though he kind of really wasn't at all. He just was really upset. So, last night, like again, may or may not be a true story. Last night, so I consoled this 8-year-old because he was very upset. And I was a little disappointed because at the end of the game, my 14-year-old extended his hand to say, "Hey, good game," right? And my 8-year-old refused to shake his hand. Now, there's a part of me as a dad that wants to correct that behavior right away. Like, hey, man, we don't do that. We win well, we lose well, right? But at the same time, he was so upset and he was viewing what had happened through the lens of not only did I lose, but my brother poured salt to my wound. Whether that was right or wrong, that's what he experienced, right?
Yeah.
So what I did in that moment is I was like, I can't really do a corrective behavior or life lesson right now, but I am going to when he calms down. So like what I did with him is I consoled him, helped him identify his emotion, said, "Hey, you know, are you upset because you lost? Or are you upset because you felt like he rubbed it in?" And he was able to clarify, "I actually wasn't upset about the loss. I thought he was rubbing it in. That hurt my feelings." So, but being able to identify those labeling emotions, but then me as his dad, right? I was like, what's the next best thing I can do here? Oh, I should just teach him that life lesson, which I
Mhm.
did, but I don't even know if that was the right move or not. But I did. I was like,
Yeah.
well, hey, now that we're calm, let's go
Mhm.
back and talk about when he extended his hand, try to, there's going to be
Right.
times where, hey, you're going to be upset and you're going to lose.
Mhm.
You still got to be a good sportsman about it. But to be honest, I really didn't know what the next step was after labeling his emotion. I just went with the next best thing that I thought would be good.
Yeah, I mean, I think your instincts were actually right on. So,
Oh, so I did okay. All right, cool.
yeah, sounds good to me. Because actually, it's interesting. I don't know if you know Mark Brackett. He has a program called Ruler, which is really interesting. It's all about helping kids, and it works with grown-ups too, but helping kids with emotional expression. And they each stand for things. So L stands for labeling emotions. Then E is expressing the emotion, and then R is regulating. So the idea is first you label the emotion. And I think it's very true that in the moment, you can't really have that lesson, or a child's not ready for that lesson if they're so upset. There's not like a lot of rational thinking able to happen at that moment. So I do think that saying, I'm going to force you to shake hands, I'm going to force you to whatever, it doesn't really have the intended effect. Probably you might get what looks like behavior, you might be complying, but that's not actually going to teach anything other than, oh, and now my dad also is rubbing, salt in my wounds, is also forcing me to do something. But I do think that after labeling it, so you let him express the emotion. So it's like, okay, I'm feeling sad, let me get it out. But then regulating. So how can I deal with this emotion? And recognizing you're helping him reflect. Like, I feel really upset. I feel like this wasn't fair, but I also need to manage my own behavior. Like, I also can't just go pout in the corner. It's not really going to be great overall, my life, if I end up pouting in the corner. So I'm actually going to try to manage my emotion, calm myself, and then behave in a sportsmanlike way if possible. And maybe that couldn't happen that time, but maybe the next time he'll have internalized something like that. So I think your instinct right there is right on, because it's kind of like, I have a lot of parents who say, like, why can't I get my child to listen when they're having a tantrum? And it's that same thing of like, there's not a lot of rational thinking in kind of emotional outbursts. And so trying to talk during those moments often doesn't work. So good job.
Oh, well, I didn't expect it, because I was sitting there last night and I was like, I don't know if I did that right. Hopefully I did. It felt like it was right. He was calm enough, but I want to talk about actually overcoming burnout and exhaustion. So, just gave you this example of like how there was overwhelm, right? Overwhelm of emotions and all, and this kind of heated moment that my son and his older brother had last night. But I want to talk about not only burnout and exhaustion for kids, but burnout and exhaustion for adults as well. And I think in a lot of times, especially we as adults, we kind of get in our own heads and we're fried, right? I look at even my wife and I, who are raising 4 boys, and we always joke that the requests never stop. It's like it's this never ending mom, dad,
Yeah.
mom, dad, I need this, right?
Yeah.
And there is a lot of exhaustion. There's a lot of overwhelm. But at the same time, we're battling to like, okay, this is not easy work. It's enjoyable work, but it's not easy. And we want to make it as positively impactful as possible. But it's hard to do that when you're just wiped out. So how do we do that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that, there's not one simple answer, I would say, because I think there's a couple things going on. I think one is that, yes, recognizing that kids are demanding, that this is really hard, and cutting yourself some slack there. I think a lot of parents add on that guilt of like, how can I make every moment quality time? And so then it feels like, oh, there's this big discrepancy between what I want to be happening, what I see as like the perfect parenting situation, and then this situation, which doesn't feel at all perfect. And so I think to recognize that kids benefit from the harder times, from the times when it feels not so perfect, just as much as they do from those amazing moments, I think can be the start. So you're not feeling all this pressure that you have to make everything feel great, even if you're not feeling great. And the other thing I think is that kids really benefit from seeing their parents model self-care. So even though it feels selfish and it feels like, oh, how can I say well, I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed right now, so I'm going to take a few minutes of quiet, or, why can you try to play that board game by yourself for a few minutes? And then you can ask me, when it's going to be my turn or something like that. Actually taking that time and talking through, not necessarily all of how you're feeling, but at least giving a sense of like, right now, I feel like there's been a lot of noise and I'd like to have a little bit more quiet, like just to help them understand your own emotional, landscape can be really powerful for them as well, because they obviously are going to need to learn to become more independent. And so to hear from other people how they're impacting them can be really helpful, even though it might feel difficult to do.
Yeah, I think we're actually doing our kids an injustice if they think the entire world is sunshine and rainbows and we have to be happy and perfect all the time. Like, I think it's really, really helpful for our kids to see us go through times where we're human, right? I mean, don't you agree?
Oh yeah, no, definitely. I mean, it's funny because I think, I've been really busy recently, and I was talking to my daughter. She's like, "Oh, do you have work? Do you have work to do?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, I'm sorry. I feel really bad." And she's like, "No, but I mean, I know sometimes people have a lot of work and they have to get through it." And, I was like, "Oh yeah. Okay." So she was funny because I was like, that, I mean, usually it's just whining, and it's like, oh, so it's interesting that actually seeing like, oh, you're doing something you like doing, and this is a busy time, but you'll get through it. I think for kids to see that not everything is just like, oh, we're always going to be focused always on you, that we have other interests, we have other things we care about, actually is helpful for kids. I mean, because it helps them realize, well, I'm going to have other things to care about too. I'm going to develop my own interests too. And we can still care about other people. It's not all or nothing. It's not, I need you 100% of the time, or you're not there for me, that there is that gray. And helping kids see that is a way of caring for them, to say that, oh, here's me, and I have all of these passions and things I like to do. And obviously I love you, but not every single one of my passions involves you. So I think that is actually really helpful.
I love you, just not right now. Go away.
Yeah, exactly.
No.
Yeah. I love you, but can you take 5 minutes? Yeah.
I love you, but I have to finish this paper. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I have a question for you too. And this is something that for our dads who have older kids, I don't think we have this necessarily, unless, I don't know, like my boys, the younger two, and then the older two, when they were younger, they were pretty open. You'd ask it almost to the point where they're just going to tell you everything. Right. Mm-hmm. Now I've noticed the older that my kids get, especially like really in this 13, 14, 15 range, like they withdraw, right? But that's what they're supposed to do. They're out there, they're supposed to actually gain some independence. Like they're figuring out their own life. But at the same time, sometimes I struggle, even though like one of the things that I pride myself on is asking my kids really great generative questions, like, hey, tell me about a part of your day today that just made you smile. Mm-hmm. Or tell me about a part of your day today where you were angry and you just like wanted to like go crazy, right? Or something like that, to where like they have to story tell, not just like, hey, how was school? Mm-hmm. But when kids seem to be like just locked up and all you want to do is connect with them, and you're getting just 1-2 word answers, and it just seems like they have zero interest in opening up. My first question is, what's really going on there, maybe in their mind, and how do we overcome that? Or do we just give them space, come back to a conversation later? What do we do?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot going on. I do think there's a part that is just really natural development, and that like kids are spending more time with their peers. They're really concerned about what their friends think, and they are becoming more internal in the sense that they're realizing, well, some of these things I want to share, and some of them maybe not so much, and so having that ability to kind of figure out for themselves what they want to say is important. So I think in part, it is a sense of saying, okay, well, I'm going to recognize that some of this is natural and not to panic. Because I feel like sometimes the panic can make us feel like, well, I have to find the right question, or I have to, generate something. But at the same time, I think a lot of kids do want to express things, but they're just not really sure how to do it. They're not quite sure of their words. They're not even quite sure of what they're feeling, even, because a lot of times it can be this really mixed emotion. They might be sort of nervous and anxious, or worried and excited. And we don't always talk about those things that are more nuanced. And so a couple of things that I've had a lot of success with parents that I've worked with is, for example, just sitting with your child and even doing something active or something where they're actually teaching you something, hopefully that you don't actually know how to do. So if it's like, it could be things like a video game or fixing something in the car or, that kind of thing. If you could just say, hey, can you show me what's happening here? Can you show me how to do this? And giving them a sense of kind of empowerment and like, oh, I do actually know this thing, not like a fake thing that you really know how to do, but something you actually don't know how to do, and letting them, you kind of walk you through it. I think that can sometimes break open some of those cycles where it feels like you're asking the same questions and they're saying the same shut down thing, and flip the tables a little bit or turn the tables, where they're saying like, oh, my parent is asking me to do something and they actually want my advice. They actually want, my support in that. And I think sometimes, and it can even be like a technical thing, like, oh, I'm making this presentation and I'm not sure how to do this thing on the computer. Like, can you show me how to do that? And that can actually, I think, just give kids a sense of control and a sense of like, oh, I am adding value here in some way. Because a lot of times kids, when they get to that age, they don't feel like they're giving anything in some ways to the family community. Like they're just like, well, I'm just, here to sit around and go to my sports and things like that. And so actually letting them do that can be a way of just starting those conversations again, I found.
Interesting. It's funny you mentioned that because, my 14-year-old, I would say he's more my quiet one,
Mm-hmm.
But what I noticed is, so like last night, we were shooting baskets and we were just kind of like lollygagging and he's like, hey, do you want to play knockout? And I'm like, I've never played knockout.
Oh yeah.
I've heard of it. I was like,
I play knockout a lot recently. Yeah.
I saw your competitiveness, like just peek in your face there. So I was like, well, teach me knockout. Like, I have no idea I've heard of it. Maybe I played it, but it's been too long. I don't remember it. So he ended up teaching it to me. Well, then his older brother came over, we played, and then my brother-in-law came, and there's 4 of us playing at this point. And how are all of our attitudes like elevated and how we were all just having fun. And then, what I noticed is my 14-year-old, who's normally pretty quiet, we went in the backyard and we sat around a fire and he was a totally different person.
Oh, wow.
It was like he was refreshed, renewed, like we did something. It was an activity, something that wasn't really intimidating. It wasn't like we sat down next to each other at the fire and I started firing questions at him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So yeah, I really like that. Another question I have for you too, and not that any parent deals with this whatsoever. In fact, I think this is far and few between, but how do we get our kids to talk more in person than be on screens? Like,
yeah, I've never seen that screen. Yeah. I don't know.
Probably new to most people.
I don't know what you're talking about. Yeah. Yeah, my daughter was like, oh, I got this screen time notification. It was just up a little bit. I was like, how much is a little bit? I totally know the situation. And I think there's a couple things. So recognizing that one, yes, technology is a huge part of everyone's life now. So I've heard some people say like, just put the phones away or just ignore the phones. And I do think, you can do that once in a while, you can set a time, but it's not practical, obviously, to just say, don't have technology. But what I think of, because I really focus on communication. And so I really emphasize kind of, well, what are we doing with the technology? How active is it and how interactive is it? So for example, are you having a Zoom or a Skype with a relative, something like that? Is that what you're doing? Are you playing a video game together and you're laughing about like the characters or some sort of level? Or are you all watching your own YouTube thing, on your own screen? So I think, those might look kind of similar, but they're actually really different in terms of what's actually happening in your family dynamic. And so when I look at screens and screen time, I think less about the numbers or how many screens or how many hours, and more about, what's actually happening and emphasizing that activeness and the interactiveness. So yeah, I'd also say there's a good room, I would say, for routine. So I also say like, well, let's just say like everybody's going to leave their phone off the dinner table. There's things like that are physical that I think can also help. So it's not like we're going to sneak our glances if the phones just aren't there, but you can't do that all the time.
Right.
For sure.
Yeah, that's especially with teenagers. Like anytime the kid gets the phone, like what are your views on TikTok?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I have mixed views on it. My daughter is obsessed with getting TikTok, but she does not have it. And she's only 10, so she's not going to have it, I think, anytime soon. But I do, yeah, I mean, I guess I'd say fundamentally, I don't think there's anything wrong with the use of the app. I think what's more concerning is that, oftentimes you can get lost in a sea of scrolling of people doing, various things you may or may not want your kids to be seeing. Right. So I think it's more of that. And also just a sense of, I think what can be troubling and disturbing for some teenagers, especially, is the sense of always wondering about how many likes you're getting. So it does sort of change your mindset, kind of like Instagram, where you're really focused on, well, I got this many likes on my post, or I got this, that when kids are already in a phase where they're really seeking approval, it can really shape how they think of themselves. If they're saying, oh, well, you got this many likes and nobody likes me, and that kind of thing. So I would watch out for things like that. But I think it does really depend on the child and how much into that they are.
That makes sense. What if it's just like mindless, like scrolling, just to scroll?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think, obviously I wouldn't say, oh, that's awful, but at the same time, it isn't really actually, a lot of research is showing it's not actually relaxing the way that we think it is. It's kind of overstimulating. And so I would try to emphasize not doing that and doing something that even may seem even more boring. So like things like sitting outside, watching the river, or like, or even like cleaning your room, like just even doing something, I think can be more satisfying than the mindless scrolling can really be draining, actually, and kind of take a lot of your mental energy, even though it's not giving you much.
So when you say it could take some of your mental energy, like explain to me, and if you don't know, I apologize for asking, but if a kid is scrolling mindlessly through TikTok, just video after video, what is happening to the brain, or do we even know at this point?
Well, yeah, actually, it's interesting because there is a lot of research showing that it actually takes mental energy to switch from one thing to the other. It's called like task switching or topic switching. So you're actually taking a lot of mental space from your ability to do anything active when you're just taking in more and more information from different sources. So it's different in some ways than if you were sitting and watching one video. It's actually having to switch constantly between these like very short, I'm doing this, now I'm doing this thing. And it is actually taking up a lot of mental resources that actually is hard to get back from. So once you do that, it can be hard to then sort of regroup, recollect, and do something, say, creative or focused, or kind of have any kind of deeper conversation after that. So it's sort of what's happening in the moment, but then also what's happening to your brain after that is you're kind of overstimulated and feel as though, okay, now I'm done. But, what have you really done, or what has really happened in your brain isn't very positive, in the sense that it is just all of these, series of images. So I would suggest it's not the best thing to be doing. I wouldn't say, okay, never, ever do it, but just to recognize that it is actually kind of taxing mentally and not necessarily on a positive side. It's not giving you anything.
So is it best to put just screen time limits on our kids' devices? So like, for instance, my two older boys have phones, and they gripe and complain all the time that we are the only parents on the planet that they have to turn their phones in every night before bed. They are not allowed to go to sleep with their phones, even in their rooms. Number two, they are only allowed 1 hour a day of screen time. That's it. And then all their apps, everything shuts down. And then they actually have to request for more screen time, which they never get unless there's an exception, like we're on a long road trip or something like that. But we have found that pretty strict guidelines, like pretty strict boundaries, have helped. Although I just see, it's interesting that you talk about how it tires down the brain and it's like fatigue, because I noticed that like when my kids are just aimlessly scrolling through TikTok while they have that screen time, it's like I'm looking at a zombie sometimes. And then when they're done with it, they're like, I don't know what to do now. Yeah. You know what I mean? And it's almost it's almost like they went for a run kind of, and it didn't even make any sense to me until you just said what you did. And I was like, huh, That's pretty interesting. So what are some other, I guess, guardrails that we need to do as parents to make sure that that's not happening?
Yeah, I mean, I do like that idea of having those limits, especially the night limit, because it is true that having that exposure to, the blue light and just is very, waking to a lot of kids, especially teenagers need more sleep. And, having a sense that somebody might text you is even keeping a lot of kids awake. So that sense of, even if the text doesn't beep, but having a sense of, oh, my text might beep. Some kids are sort of cognitively awake for that, which is not good, I would say. But I think some other things to keep in mind are just to obviously not necessarily say, okay, no mindless scrolling, no TikTok, but to help kids reflect in kind of a gentle way of like, well, how are you feeling now after you did that? How do you feel after you do X thing? How do you have the most fun online? And then kind of checking in with them as almost like a reflective partner or a guide, to say, well, let's see, like, if you only have an hour, what are the ways that, you definitely want to make use of this screen time? What are the things that are kind of giving you the best return for your time? And is it mindless scrolling? And what can you do if you notice yourself mindlessly scrolling? And this might seem kind of like light touch or more permissive, but the thing is, as kids are getting older, they're going to be doing this more and more on their own anyway. So there's only so much policing you can do when a kid is 17 or 18.
Right.
So helping them do more of that guidance for themselves and kind of guiding them in that way, rather than saying, oh, I'm going to shut down your phone every time I see you scrolling, that's just going to make them probably want to sneak it, rather than saying, okay, I'm recognizing that I'm kind of getting, I've spent 5 minutes scrolling and now I feel like I can stop, something like that. Like what's a limit you can set for yourself, that can help you realize, okay, I've done enough. And some kids will say, well, there is no limit, but hopefully, at some point, as they get more into those conversations, it can help them kind of be more reflective and regulate themselves a bit.
Yeah. I want to ask one quick opinion, and then I want to get to this final question around helping siblings get along. So I want to talk about that one as well, because I know that's a big topic. But, maybe I'm the exception only because I do this podcast, right? And I get to have all these really great conversations. So I feel like I'm more in the know of like the positive things that maybe my kids don't like, but I know that they're so positive. So when they give me grief, I'm like, careful, you're actually complimenting me. Right? So, but a lot of parents, I don't think they do know those things. So like, for instance, there's a part of me that when my kids come to me, like my 16-year-old last night, he just turned 16 and I won't allow him to have Snapchat. He's like, Dad, I am the only person, I swear to God, in my entire school that doesn't have Snapchat. Why won't you let me have it? And I've explained to him several times. I'm like, listen, man, there's a lot of downside to Snapchat.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I'm just, yeah, man, I'm not willing to allow it. When you're 18, you can have it all day long, man. Come on. I was like, and by the way, I was like, you run track, you're a sprinter, you throw javelin, you're in community band, you're in marching band, you're in jazz band and school. Like, is there not enough on your plate already? Like,
no, exactly.
And so he's like, but I'm the only one. And I joke with him and I'm like, yeah, be careful what you tell me, because I like hearing that.
Yeah, exactly.
But there is that part of me as a parent. I'm like, well, should I let him?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I know better, but then again, I battle with that a little bit. So, I guess if ever, are there certain, like, what's your view on Snapchat or that kind of app?
Yeah, I mean, I also don't have it and I don't allow it. I do feel like some of these things are just not helpful. I mean, they're just not helpful or healthy for kids in terms of the way that we're using our time, technologically speaking. So I don't necessarily say, okay, no kid should have it. But for me, I'm trying to help my kids at least use technology in a way that's somewhat active, but then also connecting with people and not necessarily just like playing around with things, various icons, various like make your face into this, like, and so I just feel like let's just not go there. Like I just don't have it. And the same for TikTok. I'm one of the only parents supposedly that doesn't allow my child to have TikTok, and I get a lot of comments about that and a lot of negative things about how, well, what about when I'm this age or when I'm this age? But just what I've seen in terms of, kids who've been on it and then who are saying like, well, I want to do this thing like this person, or I want to be like cool as this person. I just feel like there's so much comparison that's happening, so much sort of self, almost like disappointment at the self, at like how I don't look like this person, how I don't, sort of self-comparison with other people. And I just think that's really detrimental to kids' psychology. So I think it's much healthier to just keep it out as long as possible, to be honest.
Yeah. Comparison is the thief of joy.
Yeah, exactly. I think especially when like not just comparing, I mean, there's enough comparing going on in people's real lives. So then when you add technology and like you can compare yourself to an infinite number of people, that's just getting really hard for kids. Yeah,
I agree. It's even hard for us as adults. I mean, think about when we see that person that just annoys the crap out of us on social media, we're just like, oh, I'm so tired of seeing their family so happy and they're
like everything, like, or they're on this vacation and it's like the middle of a rainstorm.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, this is great. So last and final question I have for you. You've got a section in your book that talks about just overcoming and reducing tantrums, arguments, shutdowns, kids getting along. I really want to talk about sibling rivalry a little bit and kids getting along, that aspect right there, because that's something that I've had a lot of experts on the show, and this is a topic and a question that we haven't even covered yet. And so what are your thoughts, theories, and different ideas that we can maybe help the family just get along a little bit easier?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's so important. And it's often something we ignore, even in parenting books. You talk about like, so how do you talk with your child? And, we think, well, what about the kids talking to each other? And what about, them talking to us, things like that. So in my book, I really talk about what I call the 3 E's, which I think are really helpful, especially in these kind of sibling situations. And the first, and because I think it helps with language, but it also helps take others' perspectives, which is often so important when, this one sibling can't see why the other one wants what they want, or they're just, at each other's throats and things like that. So the first E is expanding. So really you're thinking about helping each child understand, well, what is this person's real opinion, or what are they really trying to tell you? What do they really want? Actually get into that, so you say you want this, but what is it about that you really want? Or, I realized, for example, one funny story was that my 2 kids were fighting because there was one, this is my, my doing, I guess, but there was Valentine's Day at the office and there was like red velvet cupcakes. And I brought home a cupcake, just one, because, it was huge. And I was like, I didn't want to take too many cupcakes. And so they were fighting because they both wanted, part of the cupcake, but they, who was going to have more. And my son, I realized, was really upset. And it just was like, before I was cutting it, and he was like, I want it. I was like, well, you can't have the whole cupcake. It's to share. And I actually expanded, like, what is it that he actually wanted? And I realized it wasn't that he wanted the whole cupcake. He wanted to be able to cut the cupcake. Like, he wanted to be in control of that situation. So he would deal with half if he could be the one to cut it. And so I realized, like, actually there was some nuance to that. It was sort of a silly argument, but it was really interesting because when we actually expanded on like, what is he wanting? We realized it wasn't exactly what I thought, which couldn't be fixed. Like, he can't have the whole thing, but we could cut it and he could be the one to cut it. So that's kind of the expanding thing, like actually getting at, well, what does each person in the situation want? And the second E goes to exploring. So exploring compromises, exploring brainstorms of like, well, how could we make this work? What is it if like you cut it? Or what is it if I go for a walk with you and then we play basketball? How would that work? How would this feel to everybody? So you're starting to kind of brainstorm out loud and letting the kids brainstorm too, and saying, well, let's figure out what would feel fair to everybody and why it would feel fair or not fair. And then the third E is evaluating. So that's usually after the fact. But like, once you come up with some kind of compromise, you do it. And then you kind of check in with everybody. Like, well, how did that feel? What about that was unfair to you? Or what about that still made you not feel so great? Or what did you like about that? And sort of thinking about for the next time, like, what did you learn from that? And I think that 3-step process is not always fail-proof. Obviously, nothing is in these situations, but I do think it can really help start to break down some of those situations that just feel like really hard to open up.
That makes total sense. And I love, hey, I'm a huge fan of acronyms because they're super easy to remember.
Exactly.
So can you repeat what each E stands for one more time?
Yeah. So the first E is expand. So just getting more of what each person wants. Second is explore. So, kind of going in the abstract. And the third is evaluate.
Got it. I love it. Make things so simple for a Harvard. You're like a Harvard grad from you're like a PhD from Harvard, and you teach there. What do you teach there?
Educational assessment. So really just like any kind of testing, basically like language testing, reading testing, cognitive or IQ testing. I teach like all of that.
Wow. That's amazing. It's good stuff.
Yeah, it's fun.
This has been so helpful, and this has been such a breath of fresh air. I love talking about parenting strategies. A lot of times on the podcast, what we've been talking about here a lot lately is marriage and relationships. And so it's refreshing to get some more parenting strategies and tips and that kind of thing. I want to make sure that the men can find you if they want to connect with you. I know you've got a weekly newsletter that you sent out with tips and strategies and things like you've explained today, but even more so. And then, of course, where people can find your book as well.
Definitely. Yeah. So you can find my book wherever books are sold, but I also have a website. So it's just RebeccaRolland.com, which is 2 C's and 2 L's. And I do have a weekly newsletter that you can sign up from the website. And that has just tips, strategies, and parent stories. I'm often taking parent questions and responding to the newsletter as well.
Very good. Well, guys, not to worry. We're going to have all the links in the show notes. I have no doubt that this particular interview was very, very helpful for you, as it was for me with Dr. Rebecca Rolland. You can find all of her links, as well as what we talked about today, as well as application for our Dad Edge Alliance, as well as our Legacy app that we've partnered with over at Legacy. If you head on over to thedadedge.com/370. Again, thedadedge.com/370. Rebecca, this has been awesome. Absolutely awesome. Thank you so much for not only writing this amazing book for us parents who really, really need these strategies, but thanks for all the good that you're doing in the world.
Oh, well, thank you. This has been a pleasure.
You bet. All right, gentlemen, go out, live legendary. Take care.